Hello everyone, welcome to the Introduction to Linguistics Fundamentals. This is going to be the first session and it's going to be the first introduction to phonetics and phonology. The whole section of phonetics and phonology is based on some material in the O'Grady, Ashivand and Katamba book. It's also partly based on Villaboga from previous semester. In the second, you're already aware that linguistics is a discipline that aims to describe language, relations between language and other practices, all the human practices and cultural elements. Now, there are 6 main areas to linguistics. These are phonetics, which is the study of sound production and comprehension; phonology, which is the study of phonological systems, and we'll see what that means later; the study of word formation and word structure; syntax, and syntax, it's probably the best well known, and it's the study of sentence structure; semantics is the study of meaning; and pragmatics is the study of language in use, and particularly how context shapes and contributes to meaning. In the first half of this course, we'll go through phonetics, phonology, morphology, and syntax, with a particular emphasis on phonetics and syntax. And then in the second half, Nadine Balbach will take over and do semantics and pragmatics with you. Now, I'm sorry if this is very obvious, but I don't want to leave anyone behind. Linguistics is a science, and we're doing science, so there's an empirical and a theoretical aspect to it, and there are many related subdisciplines within linguistics, which are things like sociolinguistics, which studies the relation between society and language; psycholinguistics, which is about how humans process language; anthropological linguistics, which is more about cultures and language use within cultures and between cultures; discourse analysis, text linguistics, etc. What it is not, and what it does not include, is literature or creative writing. It's not about learning languages, and it's not about creating languages. Those are not really part of linguistics. Now, as I mentioned, we'll start with phonetics and phonology this class, and a phone, or the root phone, comes from Greek and it means sound. So in a sense, both phonetics and phonologies mostly study sound and sound systems. Mostly, but not completely. I'll come to that in a second. It's unclear how many speech sounds there are, but at least 600 consonants and 200 vowels in the whole of the world's languages. But we don't have a complete picture of all the world's languages, so this is just a rough estimate. There could be more. And one crucial aspect is any baby can acquire any language perfectly. If you take a Mayan baby and you raise it in Kamchatka, then that Mayan baby will learn to speak Chukchi perfectly. And Kamchatka is a region in Russia, and they speak Chukchi. And the same happens the other way around. If a Norwegian baby is raised by Zulus, then it will grow up speaking perfect Zulu with perfect speech production. And even adults can, for the most part, acquire any speech sound, although it becomes progressively harder. And as I speak about different sounds, you will see I cannot pronounce them all, and we don't expect you to be able to pronounce all sounds that we will learn about, but you should be able to understand how those sounds work. Now, phonetics deals exactly with the production and comprehension of sound and the physical properties of the sound waves. Phonology, in contrast, deals with how sound systems are organized. Sign languages do have phonetics, contrary to what some people believe, and also have phonology. So these have traditionally been ignored, mostly because of tradition, I guess, quite discriminatory, but they are equally as important. And although the medium is different, the structures that you find in sign languages are completely analogous to the structures that you find in spoken languages. Sign languages are their own languages. When we speak about German Sign Language, we're not speaking about German but using your hands. It's a completely different language. The same happens for any other sign language. For example, a curious fact is that British Sign Language is completely unrelated to American Sign Language. And American Sign Language is in fact closely, or more or less closely related to French Sign Language, while British Sign Language isn't. They came from different sources and are completely different. Now to phonetics. Okay, with that in mind, we will mostly ignore sign languages for this introduction. I hope you get to learn more about them later, but we can't cover them here. So I just want to mention that because I want you to have a clear idea that they also count and they are equally important. But with that being said, this class is going to focus mostly on spoken language. At least the part about phonetics and phonology. The rest also applies to sign language. What I'm going to teach you about phonetics and phonology only applies to spoken language. Now, regarding phonetics, there are three main properties, or not properties now, but like components to phonetics. We have articulatory phonetics, which is mostly concerned with the physical aspects of the speech production process, and this includes anatomy and physiology. Then you have acoustic phonetics, which is concerned with the properties of the sound waves themselves, and hopefully you will learn about this in the next semester in the phonetics and phonology class, but not this semester. And then there is auditory and perceptual phonetics, which is concerned with how we hear and perceive sound. This is a very simplistic and basic model of how communication works. You see we have a speaker, they produce the sound, then you have a medium, which is usually the air through which sound waves propagate, and then they reach the hearer, and the hearer interprets the sound. Now, to be able to talk about speech sounds in a formally clean and precise way, we need special symbols, and the symbols are used by convention, and we follow them very closely. For this reason, the International Phonetic Association was grounded to provide a collection of such symbols, and we call IPA both the association and the alphabet, but more commonly the alphabet. And this alphabet is a collection of symbols in which we can write any human speech sound in a very precise manner. And it basically comprises mostly Latin and Greek letters, rotated and modified, but also some additional symbols. Each symbol in the IPA represents a sound of human speech. They don't represent non-speech sounds. So something like coughs, that's not represented there. And the IPA is therefore a way of transcribing speech. There are three levels of transcription we will use. One for letters, one for phonemes, and one for speech sounds. If you speak English, you're probably aware that letters don't closely match up with speech sounds. In other languages, speakers are sometimes less aware of this fact. A letter is not a sound, and sometimes one letter represents multiple sounds. Sometimes multiple letters represent one single sound, and sometimes letters don't represent any sound. So we want to be very clear in the difference that the orthographic representation of words is not necessarily the pronunciation of those words. So for transcription, we have slashes for phonemes. I'll talk about phonemes a little bit this session, and in the following sessions also. Then you have square brackets for speech sounds and angled brackets for letters. And here are a couple of examples. For German, you have more or less the same transcription for the phonological representation, which are the phonemes, and the phones is the phonetic representation here. For Spanish, you have quite a different representation between the phonemes of this word, which means a die, like the ones you used to play with, and its phonetic realization. And the point here is that while we have one single phoneme, a D, we can realize this D in very different ways in a single word. I don't know if you can hear the difference when I pronounce the word Dado. The first D is very close to the German D, but the second one isn't. It's a D. And we'll learn a little bit more about the differences between the sounds later. Right, so again, a phone is a speech sound like D or L, and a phoneme is an abstract contrastive element. So phonemes are not out there, they are abstract elements of a language. In this case, in Spanish, we have one phoneme for D, and it can be realized in multiple different ways. Phonemes are contrastive, they are contrastive segments, and you can see this in minimal pairs. And a minimal pair is two words which are only distinguished by one sound. So, for example, in German, the words Taste and Paste are only distinguished by the T and the P in the initial position, and the words Mate and Mappe are only distinguished by the T and the P in the middle position. So we can say that T and P are contrastive, and they build or they make up different phonemes. In Spanish, however, L and D are never contrastive. There is no word where one time you have to use L and the other time you have to use D for a different word. So this never happens, so they are not contrastive and they are grouped together under the same phoneme. Now, to the speech organs we use to produce phones, a very rough diagram is presented here, going from the lungs upwards. First we have the lungs, and these are probably the most important organs in speech production because most phones are involved the use of the lungs, which provide the airstream, which is indispensable for producing sound. You cannot produce sound without airstream. Then you have the phonation organs, which are in the larynx, which are the vocal folds, and then you have the articulation organs, which are the supra-laryngeal organs, which is everything up here between the nasal cavity and the pharynx. Now, a sound can only be produced when an air stream is set in motion. There is no way of producing sound without air. You can try it, it doesn't work. There are three main stages to sound production. First, we generate the airstream, usually with the lungs. Then there is a phonation process, which is a modification of the airstream that happens at the glottis. We can go back and see. So air is produced in the lungs, then we modify it at the glottis, and then further modification happens up here, right? So the articulation is that further modification in the supraglottalic organs. Now, there are two directions of airstream. One is aggressive, this is the most common one, and another one is ingressive, which is inwards towards the body or towards the lungs. Most languages use the aggressive airstream. There are other sources or three sources of airstream. The most common one is again pulmonic, then there's glottalic, and then there's velaric, which is, so glottalic is produced with the glottis and velaric is produced with the velum. So Regarding pulmonic, again, you have pulmonic aggressive and pulmonic ingressive. Ingressive is very rare. It does happen in some languages. You can see an example of that if you visit this link. Please do it. It is very hard to visualize these ideas without hearing examples, so I highly recommend that you do look up the examples that I am providing you. Otherwise, you won't have a clue what ingressive consonants are, because I can't pronounce them properly and I cannot show you, but if you go to the audio, it will be very clear. Now, the other types of airstream, glottalic and velaric, also happen. Glottalic is adjectives. Again, please check this out. There are adjectives in the world's languages. They're very interesting. And velaric is produced with the velum, mostly clicks. Here are some examples, and they also discuss this mechanism of air production. And while some of these are very rare, for example, adjectives do happen in English, and they are relatively common, and they have been becoming they've become very common recently. You can watch this video on the topic. Now, regarding the phonation process, this is a further modification to the airstream that happens at the glottis, and this is a rough view of your larynx. You see here the trachea and the larynx, and here you have the thyroid cartilage, where you find the glottis and the vocal ligaments and the vocal folds. And the vocal folds vibrate and move to modify the air that's passing through them. So again, the air flows from the lungs of the trachea, it passes through the muscle, through a muscle which we named the larynx, and within the thyroid cartilage there are vocal folds. And the vocal folds can be pulled apart or drawn closely together, and they produce different types of phonation. There are many different types of phonation. This is not exhaustive. We have voices, voiced, whispers, murmurs, creaky voice, etc. So the two most common ones are voiceless and voiced. In a voiceless sound, the vocal folds are pulled apart and the air passes directly through. So there is no real modification of the vocal folds to the air, and the sounds are said to be voiceless. Some examples are the initial sounds in words like fish, sing, house. Those are completely voiceless because there is no vibration. In a voiced sound, the vocal folds are close together and they vibrate while the air passes through them, and we call these sounds voiced. Some examples are the German words for sein and Wein. Those sounds are voiced, and you can hear or feel the difference between voiceless and voiced sounds if you, for example, put your hands in front of your larynx and then say the sounds out loud. So the F versus the V sound and the S versus the Z sound. You should try it out and you will hear or feel your larynx vibrating a little bit when you pronounce the voiced sounds. Now, to whispers, the front of the vocal folds are close together, but the posterior parts are apart, so the air can still pass through and there are no vibrations and everything is voiceless. So when you whisper a word, then it becomes voiceless. Then there are murmurs. This is breathy voice. This is relatively common in some English dialects. You can watch the YouTube video there. The idea here is that the vocal folds are close together but relax, and they allow air to pass through them. And the resulting sound is breathy, or we call them breathy. And creaky voice, I don't have a diagram now for creaky voice, but the vocal folds are compressed very tightly, and the sounds have a creaky effect that's caused by very low frequency vibrations. So they vibrate very slowly, your voice goes deeper, and this is relatively common when singing. Now, finally, we come to the articulation, and after the articulation is what happens after the airstream process and the phonation process happened. So the supraglottal speech organs determine the final complex acoustic properties of the speech sound. And here's a diagram for the supraglottal organs. You have quite a few. We will discuss them more in detail in the next video. But you have everything between the pharynx here and the lips can play a role. There are three major sound classes. These are vowels, consonants, and glides. Consonants are sounds where the airstream is obstructed at the supraglottal position in some way. And they are classified according to three characteristics. We will discuss them next session, which are place of articulation, like where does the obstruction happen, the manner of articulation, that's what kind of obstruction there is, and the phonation that happen at the glottis. And vowels are sounds which are completely unobstructed at the supraglottal position, and they are basically characterized by the position of the tongue, the rounding of the lips, and the position of the velum. Glides are a combination of both vowel and consonant sounds. They are produced with a similar articulation to vowels, but they end up being consonants. Some examples are wet or yet, the first sound, or in boy and now the final sound. And you can see the contrast in pairs like see you later or who would do that. So between see and you, here you have a vowel, here you have a glide, and if you pronounce them together you will hear the difference. Now with all this we can give exact characterizations of speech sounds, of individual sounds. Here's an example of the characterization of T. It is aggressive because the source of the airstream is aggressive pulmonic. Right, it's pulmonic because we use the lungs for this. It's voiceless because the glottal state is voiceless. It is alveolar because the articulation happens at the alveolar ridge. And it is a stop because of that's the manner of articulation. And we will learn about this during the next session. So that's basically it for this video. Please do watch the videos and listen to the files. It is very difficult to picture all these ideas without examples. Because of the medium, it's relatively hard for me to give you examples directly, but do check out the videos and the sound file. And if you have any comments or questions, you can write me an email, or you can ask the tutors during the tutorial. Thank you.